Hi, I'm Serena Patel. I'm the author of Anisha, Accidental Detective, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about being published. My journey to being published was a little bit unconventional in that I was writing for a little time by myself. I'd started writing because I saw a lack of diverse representation in the children's books that I was buying for my own children, and I feel like all children should be able to see themselves as the heroes of their own stories and of the stories they read. And so that's what got me started, really. And I had done a writing course with the Golden Egg Academy, and I had, sort of explored what sort of story I wanted to write. I'd kind of found the core of what I was trying to say. I had entered a competition, the Undiscovered Voices competition you might have heard of, and I was one of the finalists in 2018. And that propelled my journey a little bit faster than probably would have been the case. And I ended up in an auction situation, which was very surreal, and still now, I can't quite believe that's how it happened, but it did. And I am published with Usborne. I chose Usborne as my publisher because I just had a good gut feeling about them. And I think that's the thing that I have tried to stay true to all through my journeys, that I've, gone with what my gut says. I've, tried to think about what's important to me in a publisher, in an agent. And, so far, touch wood, that's seen me right. Being published, it's not what I expected, and I'm not really sure what I expected, to be honest. I think when you're writing, before you have an agent, before you have a book deal, perhaps for me certainly, I was so focused on just getting there, just seeing my story as an actual book. I didn't really consider what that might look like, what being a published author would feel like, the highs, the lows, the kind of roller coaster of a journey that you go on to get there. None of that had really occurred to me. And, some of it came as a surprise, some things I was expecting. And I suppose that's what I want to talk about really today, is what it's really like being published. So if we go back to June of 2018, when I signed my book deal, so I had my offer in April, and then it takes a little while for contracts to come through. There is quite a lot of waiting in publishing, which, was something I found really hard at the start, because so much is unknown as well. You're doing all of this for the first time, and you kind of think, you just want it to happen, and I'm quite an impatient person, so I didn't do well with all of the waiting. But so had my offer in April, fantastic, we celebrated, we were so happy, and then it went quiet for a little bit, and that was hard. And then I signed my contract in June. I went down to the offices at Usborne and met everybody, and that was really wonderful because that kind of gave context to what was happening. It gave me, something to focus on. And one of the first things my editor gave me when I went to Usborne was a big fat brown envelope with my marked up manuscript. So I kind of realised quite quickly that the work was not yet over. I'd already done several big restructures and redrafts of Anisha. She wasn't called Anisha at that time. She was actually called Saffron. And one of the first things my publisher said to me was, we think we need to have a look at the title. We think we need to have a look at the name of the main character. And that was because they were really thinking about the longevity of the series. They wanted the name to be something they could put on the cover that would pop, that it would immediately speak to the audience. And, we had to have a discussion about that. And it was a team kind of effort, really. And, we all threw names in and we played with what might look and sound the best. Anisha came out on top. So again, straight away, it was, a team discussion. And Usborne is like a family. So, I love that everybody in the publishing house reads what's being published because, they're all on board with it, and they all love the story. They have to love the story to want to publish it. And that's quite scary, but also really wonderful when you're working on a book because everybody's really invested in making it the best it can possibly be. So I took away my edits, and we had ongoing conversation about the title. I started working on the structure of the story. I think we did about 3 big edits on the first Anisha book, and it was due. So I signed in 2018. It was due to be published the following year, and when you're going through the publishing process, my books are illustrated, and so one of the big things was that we needed the right illustrator, and that's something that I couldn't control. And again, this is another thing that I found really tough to kind of come to terms with, that there are elements of the publishing process that you're not in control of, and once you sign with a publisher, you are in essence handing over your work, and it's in the hands of very wise and very qualified people, but it's quite hard to not be in every conversation about your book, because that's the reality of it. You're not going to be involved in every single conversation that takes place, and there will be meetings internally at the publishing house, and you might get to hear the decision that comes out of that meeting, but you're probably not going to be involved in the discussion. And there are other things where, my editor will come to me and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I'll have an opportunity to input. But I don't need to be involved in every single decision. So that was something to kind of get my head around when I first signed. We had a little hiccup actually with the first book, in that we were struggling to find the right illustrator. And we had a couple of bumps in the road with that. And that actually created a delay in the process, because without the right illustrator, that publishing works to a schedule, so they put in a date for publication, and then they kind of work backwards from that. So I've sort of got my head a bit around that now with the Anisha series. Obviously it's different for every book, but because mine are illustrated, we need to allow the illustrator 2 or 3 months in that kind of window of when I've started writing to when it's published. Emma has to have like a 3-month window to be able to illustrate, and so she'll submit roughs, she'll submit revised drawings, and then we'll go to final. So that takes time, and obviously her work is very intricate, and it's not something she can just sort of whip up in half an hour. It takes time to create illustrations of that standard. So all of that's got to be factored in. So what happened was because we didn't have an illustrator that we were happy with, we kind of had to push everything back. And so my book was moved from, I think it was supposed to be the September of 2019, and it got moved to the following, I think initially it was the following March, and then it might have got, it was the following March. So that felt like a really big delay at that time, because I'd sort of got my heart set on being published in that September. I was turning 40 that year, and so in my head, I was going to turn 40, I was being published, and that sort of blew a hole through it really, and I was really disappointed, and I struggled with it a little bit to kind of come to terms with it, and it felt at the time like a huge delay. I felt like this is never going to happen, and I sort of told myself, it's just you, it's your book, and you tell yourself all sorts of weird things, like they've changed their mind and they just don't want to say, and you go through all of these emotions, and of course that wasn't the case at all, and Usborne were really supportive and wonderful, but I just couldn't see it right then. And then we got Emma on board, and I was just so excited when I started seeing her illustrations. It was just so wonderful, and I knew that they'd made the right decision. But during that time, I kind of finished up doing my bit on the first book, and then we were just kind of waiting. Emma did all her illustrations, and then we had a bit more waiting. And in that time, I wrote the second book, and this is the weird thing about being published and writing a series, because quite often you are publishing one book but you're already writing 2 books ahead. So I started writing the second book, finished writing it, and that went off to Emma for illustrations as well. And so by the time we got to March, I think I had started thinking about the third book already, because that's just the way our kind of schedule was. And the first book was published at the beginning of March in 2020, and I was really fortunate that I still got to have a book tour. I got to go into schools to talk about it, and that was really wonderful. It was really special. We got some national press. We were in The Guardian, the FT. I did an interview for The Telegraph. We were in the Big Issue. You know, quite high profile, and I wasn't expecting that at all. And so talking to journalists, that was a new one for me. And, you know, telling my story and, you know, sometimes answering personal questions, just, yeah, learning how to navigate all of that stuff can be quite tough. I was quite lucky that Usborne had given us some training. All new authors get training to deal with kind of events, social media, press, that sort of thing. And I have a great publicist. And I suppose my tip there is to kind of lean on the people who are there to support you. You know, my publisher is fantastic, and everybody at Usborne, I know if I have an issue, I can go to them. And they, you know, they're always very, very supportive, and, you know, will try and help however they can. And I think that's really important because, again, it is a team effort. You know, you're all working to the same goal, to publish the best possible book, and to promote it in the best way possible. But also they recognise that, you know, you are a human being, and, you know, there might be stuff you're not comfortable with. There might be stuff you want to talk about. You know, for me, I like to talk about the fact that all children should be able to see themselves in books as the hero, and that's really important to me. That's one of the main reasons I write. So, you know, thinking about what your message is and why is it you write, you know, because those are the things you'll be asked. And, you know, it was, the first year was a bit of a roller coaster because obviously straight after we published at the beginning of the March, we were hit by a pandemic, and so, you know, all my events and everything sort of just completely dropped off, and so I was at home, and I think we were all authors were sort of navigating how to keep working and how to keep engaging during that time. And, you know, I think a lot of people turn to books, and a lot of people turn to storytelling, story reading, and so in a way, you know, I was still able to really be quite successful at connecting and, you know, talking about the stories, and I was really grateful to everybody who carried on cheering on the series. And then the second book published in the September, and in that time I'd done a couple of kind of virtual events. I had, and again, that was something new, because, you know, in the lead up to the publication of the first book, I had been planning for in-person events. So I'd made some slides, I had my kind of talk about my journey, about what inspired me, about what inspired the series, and I had some kind of, you know, audience participation activities that I wanted to do, but obviously we weren't doing in person anymore, so I had to adapt that and make it, you know, make it work for virtual events, and so that's what I did, and that worked really well, actually, to my surprise. And so then in September the shops were open a little bit, so I was able to go into some bookshops and do some signing. You know, we did a lot of promotion for the second book online. I sort of thought around ways we could do stuff at home. It's got a foam volcano in it, so we made a paper mache volcano at home and exploded it in the garden, you know, stuff like that. Just thinking creatively around what can I do to kind of promote the book, and, you know, fun stuff that readers might want to look at, or might want, you know, might make them want to read the book. And yeah, it was a, you know, it's a learning curve. I then was writing book 3, which is Granny Trouble, which is the green one behind me, and that came out just this July. So the beginning of this year, I sort of had a bit of a plan, because I've got 2 Anisha books being published this year, in 2021, and so I you know, have been writing. I've been writing book 4. I've also started writing book 5, so you can see book 3 came out in July, but I'm already 2 books ahead, and so I think my kind of experience of writing a series has been very fast. It's been very, you know, I've had to learn to work to really tight deadlines and think creatively, kind of almost on demand sometimes, which is not always easy. You know, I wrote the first draft of Showstoppers, which is the 4th book in the series. I wrote that in 4 weeks, and I knew it wasn't good, and I think that's something else to think about, that knowing that the first draft might not always be good, and that's okay. that, you know, I knew it had some good stuff in it, but I knew it wasn't a good draft. And I, you know, I always send my email to my editor with the proviso that, you know, this is a bit rubbish, and it's going to need some work. And, you know, she's fine with that, because that's what the editing process is there for. You know, I will be amazed if I meet someone who writes a perfect first draft. You know, the whole point of it is to kind of get the words down, and I've become comfortable with that. You know, there was a time when I wouldn't have shown anybody anything that hadn't been, you know, kind of gone over with a fine-tooth comb, but now I realise that the first draft is the dump of all the creative stuff and all of the ideas, and, you know, the second draft is there for the structural stuff, and, you know, and that's okay. You know, and my editor is fantastic at kind of picking apart what it is I'm trying to say. And so, yeah, again, coming back to the kind of the idea of that this is a team effort, you know, working with an editor has just been so amazing and fantastic, because I feel like she brings out the very best in my storytelling. And so, you know, sometimes I meet new writers who are worried or nervous about the editing process or wary of it, and they feel like their creativity is going to be taken away by editing. And I would say no, not at all, because if anything, I feel like it brings out more of the creativity, because you're bouncing ideas around. And, you know, my editor knows that if she says to me, you know, how about this or how about that, 9 times out of 10 I won't go with exactly what she said, but that will spark off something else, and I'll come back with something even sillier, which, you know, hopefully works really well. And so we've kind of fallen into this relationship where we're sort of bouncing ideas off one another, you know, and I really value her opinion and, you know, her ideas and thoughts. So it's important to be ready for that, really, you know, that collaboration, because that's what it is. And, you know, working with an illustrator as well. Emma brings out in the text, you know, in the drawings, things that I've written in the text but not really thought too deeply about, but she brings them out in such a humorous way and really brings the characters to life. And the series would not be what it is without her illustrations, you know, and I'm so happy to work with her, and I really value her part of the story, because it's just equally as important as the words. So, you know, I think it's important to think about these things and think about how you feel about some of these things, if and when you are published, because, you know, these are all things that you're going to have to consider and adapt to and be flexible about. You know, things do quite often change, and the goalposts do move. And you know, I'm the worst one for that. You know, when I was not published, I just thought, well, when I'm published, you know, I'll be happy. And, you know, then when I was published, I thought, well, you know, when we publish the next one, or when we do the next one, or, you know, when we were shortlisted for an award, well, if we win the award, or, you know, if this happens or that happens, I think you've got to go easy on yourself a little bit, you know, and just recognise you've come a long way already. And, you know, I'm saying that for myself as much as anybody. You know, in terms of what to expect in the process, as I say, there's a lot of waiting. You know, for me at the moment, I feel like I probably don't get much waiting time now, because we're sort of in the throes of, you know, the schedule, and we're releasing 6 books over the course of 3 years, and, you know, that's quite intense. But in the beginning, certainly, you know, there is waiting, and it's kind of my kind of thought would be try not to be too anxious about that. I know that's difficult, and that's easy for me to say now, but I know I did a lot of worrying early on, and a lot of it, you know, was not needed, because things did work out. And you know, knowing that you're in good hands, you know, publishers don't just take on books for the sake of it. They take on books that they love and want to publish, and, you know, they have the books and your best interests at heart. And, you know, don't be afraid to ask questions as well, because in the early days I was always thinking, you know, I'm being a pain here asking every little question, but actually that's what they're there for, and that's what your agent's there for, to answer those questions that you're kind of a bit scared to ask. And even now I kind of go, oh, sorry for being a pain. But actually, you're not being a pain, you know, because you are as much part of the team as everybody else. And so, you know, it's okay to ask questions, you know, and connect with other people who are at the same stage of the journey as you and who also are further on in the journey as you, because that really helped me, especially during this last couple of years, you know. Being able to connect with other authors who were also publishing in the same year as me was an absolute lifesaver, because they had similar experiences, they had different experiences. When I felt like I was the only one who was having delays to my publication, another author said to me, oh yeah, that happened to me. My book was delayed by a year. And she said it so casually, and I thought, wow, you know, it's not just me, it's not my book, it's just that these things happen sometimes in publishing, and you know, it usually works out okay. And you know, for me it certainly did. You know, when I look back, I think, gosh, what was all that worrying about? Because it worked out all right. And you know, the series is so much better for that little bit of time that they took to kind of get the right illustrator, get the right look for the series. You know, it worked out for the best. Post-publication, I suppose I should talk to you a little bit about. So, you know, I'm 3 books into the series. I have another 3 coming. So as I say, I've written book 4. It's about to go off to the printers imminently, and book 5 will be coming. Book 6 I haven't even started thinking about yet, and who knows after that. But then I've also been invited to edit an anthology. I'm working on something else that's top secret. So, you know, different doors have started to open creatively for me, and I still feel like a debut, actually. I realised when we came into this year that I'm not a debut anymore, and I thought, yeah, but I still don't feel like I know what I'm doing. And actually, when I speak to other authors who've been published for a couple of years, they say the same. You know, they don't really feel, they still get the imposter syndrome, and I think that's important to acknowledge that that doesn't really go away. You know, even with award listings, or you know, it just, none of that really makes you feel like you know what you're doing. And we are all kind of, you know, trying to make the best of the talent that we have, and, you know, trying to write the best stories we can, and, you know, just do the very best job we can, really. But life as an author is varied. It's interesting. You know, I did a whole bunch of World Book Day events this year, and just really, you know, it was frantic, and it was, you know, so much technology to deal with, and it was just absolutely bonkers, but I loved it. And I loved seeing the reactions of the children and hearing what they thought of the series. I love getting posts from readers, you know, with drawings where they've, you know, made their own book cover, or they've drawn an illustration from the book. I love that. You know, I love hearing from parents that their child has seen themselves for the first time in the stories. You know, that for me just makes it all totally worth it. So I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about my publishing process now that I already have books out in the world. So life as a published author is in essence a juggling act, really. So I am kind of moving between writing and doing events and doing other kind of written promo, answering interview questions, doing stuff for schools and libraries, and now that kind of we're able to, going out to bookshops, libraries, schools, all of that sort of stuff. So I'm sort of squeezing the writing in between all of that. So it is really a juggling act. I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about the process I go through now, because writing a series, we're always kind of thinking about the next book, and we're releasing 2 books a year now, so it's quite intense. So I have to be really good with my planning and my preparation before I even start writing, really. So the way it works is that when I'm kind of thinking of pitching an idea to my editor about what the next book should be about, I write a short paragraph. Sometimes that's already happened at contract stage. So for example, with books 5 and 6, when we kind of had the offer to write 2 more, I wrote a couple of paragraphs on different ideas I had for those books, what the mystery could be for Anisha to solve, and those books were bought on that basis by Usborne. So I already know in essence what the mystery is going to be, and that might get tweaked and kind of change as I enter the writing process, but we kind of have an idea. Once that paragraph's been okayed by my editor, I'll do something called a chapter synopsis, and that's basically me going through the story chapter by chapter, talking about what happens in each part of the story, what is Anisha doing, where are we in the mystery solving process, but also what's happening in the background, because quite often there's other stuff going on that she has to contend with. So whether it be family stuff, whether it be a road trip or a science fair, or you know, her granny getting arrested, you know, there's always something else going on in the background that Anisha has to contend with. And so I'll talk briefly about that. I'm only talking about 3 or 4 lines for each chapter, and then I will send that to my editor. She'll have a look at it. She'll come back with any thoughts, suggestions, tweaks that she might want to make at that stage. And then it'll come back to me when she's happy with that. It's kind of over to me then. And what I do is I draw a story diagram. So this helps me visually, and different things will work for different people, but this seems to help me kind of keep on track with my storytelling. So I kind of draw boxes for each chapter. I write the main action point for each chapter in each box, and I have that pinned up on my wall so that I can kind of follow it through and see where the story's at, where I'm at in the story, and kind of keep it, you know, on track so that I don't go off on a tangent, which I have a tendency to do. And then once I'm happy with that, I will start writing. And so it's chapter 1, you know, start at the beginning. Sometimes I write out of sync. Sometimes if I'm really stuck on a section of the book, I will go a bit forward and write the next bit and then kind of come back to it. Something might spark an idea and I can go back and write it and fill in the gap. Otherwise, I might wait right till the end and then go back and fill it in. That has happened. Sometimes I write the ending really early on because I kind of know in my head how I want the story to finish. Or I'll get an idea for a really, you know, cute line, or, you know, something funny is going to happen right at the end, that little twist to leave it on. And so I'll put that in, and it might change later on, but it's there. I know I've done that bit, and I can come back to it when I've finished writing the whole thing. I'll write my first draft quite quickly. The first draft for Showstoppers was written in 4 weeks, and that was intense writing every day. I set myself a little target of 2,000 words a day. Anisha books are quite short. They're about 30,000 words, just under each one. And so I kind of set myself a target, 2,000 words a day, and I'll spend a couple of weeks really writing a very, very messy first draft with lots of holes, lots of gaps, lots of come back to this or write something funny here, little reminders for myself. And then I'll go back through it. I'll read it, see what I think. If there's stuff that needs to come out, I'll take it out at that stage, or, you know, I might change some stuff, add some stuff. And then I will kind of go through, you know, I'll print it all off, read it, make my notes, go back through again on the laptop, make all my changes, read it again. And then if I want to kind of make any tweaks, I will. And then by that stage, I kind of think, okay, you know, it's ready to go to Stephanie. And as I've said before, you know, I've got comfortable with sending a really messy draft because I think that's okay. I know it's going to be messy. I know it's going to have issues. I know there's going to be structural stuff that I need to change. So I don't spend too much time trying to make it perfect because, you know, there's no point making it perfect if you're going to come back and rip a whole section out because, you know, inevitably, sometimes that's what needs to happen. So I'll send that off. Usually Stephanie's quite quick at coming back to me because we're working to a really intense schedule. So for example, I sent her book 5 last week. No, actually at the beginning of this week. And she has already come back to me with editorial notes. And she will send me quite a big document. It could be sort of 6-7 pages of editorial feedback on the main kind of themes and things that she wants to see drawn out more, the things she loves, the things that we can keep. And, you know, quite often she will say, we need to do some work on the narrative because that's kind of my area where I usually need to do some work. And then she'll also send me a marked up manuscript which will have all of the edits in. I work with 2 editors actually. I work with Stephanie and another editor called Alice, and they kind of double team so that there's always, you know, an objective fresh pair of eyes on the manuscript, and I've always got somebody I can go back to if the other person is off. So I'll get my feedback, I'll get my marked up manuscript, and I will take a day to just really absorb what they're saying, what the notes say. We're actually having a meeting on this one just to kind of flesh out any ideas and bounce around a few things. And then once I've had that meeting and made my notes, I will start editing. And I usually get about 4 weeks to do the next edit. Which doesn't sound like very long, and it's quite intense. The edit 2 is always quite intense and quite stressful, because it does involve quite a lot of structural stuff, and I'm doing quite a big edit at this point, so it is kind of tearing of the hair feeling when I'm doing that. I'll send that back, then it will come back to me. Usually at that point, if we've done a good job on the structural edit, we can go to line edit, and line edit and copy edit sometimes go hand in hand. It depends how good a job I've done of the structural edit, to be honest. And it, you know, line by line, going through for grammar, going through for common sense check, you know, any bits that we've kind of missed or need elaborating on a bit more. Hopefully the structure by this point is fine, if I've done my job properly. And then it goes to a copy editor. Copy editor is somebody who is not Stephanie or Alice, and is another editor within Usborne, and they will go through with a fresh pair of eyes, reading it to see if it actually makes sense, and, you know, have I done what I thought I set out to do? Does the story make sense? Is it fun? Is it entertaining? You know, do things make sense within the world of Anisha? And the copy editor is fantastic, because they'll quite often pick up on little things that we've all missed because we've read it so many times now. So that's, you know, always really helpful. At this point is when Emma gets involved. So Stephanie will send a brief to Emma with the manuscript so she can read it, because that helps, and with a brief of the sorts of illustrations they want. You know, where do they want illustrations? What kinds of illustrations do they want? And Emma will start drawing up some really rough sketches of what she thinks it should look like. And at the same time, the book will go off to the proofreader. Proofreader will do their kind of bit. We also have a sensitivity reader who will do a bit of a check for anything that jumps out at them. And all of that sort of happens simultaneously. I will get a look at Emma's rough sketches. If there's anything I want to make suggestions on, I have the opportunity to do so, which is lovely. Quite often I just go, wow, she's done an amazing job. And because she does. And, you know, it might be something like really minor that I might say, you know, oh, could we have this? Or, you know, what about this? But, you know, generally, Emma's amazing. And then the proofread comes back. I've just done the proofread for book 4, actually. So that is kind of the text laid out in book form. So it's looking on the screen as it would when it's printed out. And it has some of the rough sketches in place so we can see where the illustrations are going to go. And it usually just has a few little kind of comments, you know, what does this mean? Or I didn't quite get this, or, you know, little things. And it might be like 10 or 15 little tweaks where Stephanie is amazing and she kind of lists them out for me, and then I just go through and go yes, 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 or can we change it to this? And, you know, it's very, very small changes. And then we're just now waiting for Emma's final artwork to come back, because we've sort of fed back on that. She's off doing the final artwork. When that comes back, it gets inserted into the book. It all gets another final check over from myself, from my editors. You know, everybody will have a last look over it, and I'll have written the dedication and the acknowledgements by this point. And then it goes off to the printers, which is quite scary because there's no return after this. And that's the process, really. And then I kind of move on to the next one, which is what I'm doing at the moment. I'm in the middle of writing book 5, which I actually started writing while we were editing book 4. So yeah, quite often you'll find you're working on more than one project at a time, which is where the juggling comes in. But hopefully that's given you a bit more insight into the actual process of publishing a series, when you are, you know, committed to more than one book, and you are, you know, not even a series, if you're committed to more than one book, you know, some book deals are for 2 books or 3 books. So when you're committed to a series of books, and, you know, you're working to those deadlines, that's the kind of juggling that's involved, and you will quite often are working on more than one book. This year I will have worked on, let's count this up now, because at the beginning of the year I did a final proofread for book 3. I wrote book 4. I have started writing book 5. I'm also working on a top secret book, and I'm working on an anthology. So that's 5 books I'm working on this year, which, when I say it like that, sounds absolutely bonkers. But that's the publishing process. I hope that's helped.